The lost episode, The Endless Mall, a second horror story from the amazing world of Gumball that was never meant to be aired. It was supposed to be a fun Saturday at the Elmore Mall. Gumball and Darwin had convinced their mom to drop them off for a few hours of window shopping and arcade games. The mall was always busy on weekends, filled with families, teenagers, and the usual chaos that made Elmore feel alive. But when Nicole's car disappeared around the corner, something changed. The first thing they noticed was the silence. Not the comfortable quiet of an empty space, but the wrong kind of silence that made your ears ring and your skin crawl. The mall's usual background noise, the chatter of shoppers, the distant music from stores, the echo of footsteps on tile, had vanished completely. "Darwin, where is everyone?" Gumball asked, his blue fur standing on end as they walked through the main entrance. The automatic doors had opened normally, but the sound they made seemed to echo forever in the empty space. Darwin floated beside him, his orange fins trembling slightly. "Maybe we're early? Maybe the mall isn't open yet." But the lights were on. The stores were open. The escalators were running. Everything looked exactly as it should, except for one crucial detail. There were no people. Not a single soul anywhere to be seen. They walked deeper into the mall, their footsteps echoing strangely off the polished floors. The sound seemed to bounce back from directions that didn't make sense, as if the mall had more levels and corridors than it should have. "Look," Darwin pointed with one of his fins toward the food court. "The food is still warm." Steam rose from abandoned trays of French fries and half-eaten burgers. Drinks sat with ice still floating in them, condensation beating on the plastic cups. It was as if everyone had simply vanished mid-bite, mid-conversation, mid-life. Gumball approached one of the tables where a family meal sat untouched. For plates, for drinks, for sets of silverware. A child's toy lay beside a small cup with a cartoon character on it. The scene was so normal, so everyday, that its emptiness felt like a violation of reality itself. "This is really weird, even for Elmore," Gumball muttered, picking up a French fry. It was still hot, still crispy, as if it had been served moments ago. That's when they heard it. Music, faint and distant, coming from somewhere deeper in the mall. It was the kind of cheerful, generic mall music that usually played in the background, but now it sounded hollow and wrong, like a music box winding down. They followed the sound, walking past empty stores with their lights still on and their displays perfectly arranged. The mannequins in the clothing stores seemed to watch them as they passed, their plastic faces frozen in expressions that looked less like smiles and more like grimaces in the strange, empty light. The music led them to the center of the mall, where a large fountain usually attracted crowds of people tossing coins and making wishes. The fountain was still running, water cascading down its tiers in an endless cycle, but the coins at the bottom seemed to have multiplied impossibly. There were thousands of them, maybe millions, creating a carpet of copper and silver that stretched far deeper than the fountain should have been able to hold. "Gumball," Darwin whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of falling water. "Look at the escalators." The escalators were still running. The lost episode, The Amazing World of Gumball, the Mirror World. It was a bright Saturday morning in Elmore. Gumball and Darwin were walking through the park, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. Everything seemed perfectly normal until they noticed something strange. Where the old fountain used to be, there now stood a large, ornate mirror with an intricate golden frame. The mirror was tall and elegant, shimmering mysteriously in the sunlight. "That's weird," said Gumball, approaching the mirror. "I don't remember this being here before." Darwin nodded, equally curious. "Maybe someone put it here as art?" Gumball looked at his reflection in the mirror, but something was wrong. When he waved his left hand, his reflection waved its right hand, but with a strange delay. The reflection seemed to have a mind of its own. "Darwin, look at this," Gumball called out, but before Darwin could respond, something impossible happened. Gumball's reflection reached out from inside the mirror, its hand breaking through the glass surface like it was water. The reflection grabbed Gumball's real hand and began pulling him toward the mirror. "Help me," Gumball cried as both he and Darwin were pulled through the liquid glass into the mirror world. On the other side, everything was backwards. Trees grew downward into the sky, clouds floated on the ground, and all the signs were written in reverse. This was Elmore, but wrong. They met their mirror selves versions with opposite personalities. Mirror Gumball was quiet and serious, while Mirror Darwin was loud and reckless. Even their family was different. Mirror Nicole was lazy, Mirror Richard was intelligent, and Mirror Anais was chaotic. The mirror world seemed more vivid and real than their actual world. Colors were brighter, sounds were clearer, everything was more alive. It was seductive and beautiful, making their real world seem dull in comparison. But as they stayed longer, Gumball and Darwin began to change. They were becoming like their mirror selves, losing their true personalities and becoming their opposites. When they tried to return to the original mirror, their mirror selves blocked the way. The mirror versions wanted to keep them trapped forever and replace them completely. Gumball and Darwin ran desperately toward the mirror to escape, but their real world on the other side was fading away. The mirror was becoming more solid, trapping them in this backwards reality. Soon, they could no longer tell which side of the mirror was real. They looked confused and desperate, unable to distinguish between reality and reflection. The camera began to zoom into the mirror's surface, showing infinite reflections of Gumball and Darwin on both sides. Multiple versions of themselves reflected endlessly, all looking confused and desperate. The zoom continued deeper, showing fractal-like infinite reflections. The mirror surface created endless recursive patterns with Gumball and Darwin trapped in infinite loops of reflection. At maximum zoom, a kaleidoscope effect showed infinite mirror reflections. Gumball and Darwin appeared as tiny figures repeated endlessly in geometric patterns, trapped forever in the infinite nature of their prison. Then the zoom began to pull back, reversing the effect. They were still trapped in infinite reflections, but now visible as larger figures, exhausted and defeated, accepting their fate of being trapped forever between realities. The final zoom out showed the ornate mirror standing alone in Elmore Park, but now both sides showed Gumball and Darwin trapped inside. They existed only as reflections now, waving sadly from within the mirror. But the story wasn't over. Other children from Elmore approached the mysterious mirror. Penny, Banana Joe, and their classmates walked toward it, curious about what happened to their friends. Penny reached out to touch the mirror surface, just like Gumball had done. Her reflection started to move independently, showing the same pattern beginning again. Inside the mirror, Gumball and Darwin could be seen trying to warn the new children, banging on the glass from inside, but no one could hear their silent screams. The mirror began to pull Penny and the other children toward it, just as it had done before. Multiple hands reached out from the mirror surface to grab the new victims. The final shot showed Elmore Park at sunset with the ornate mirror standing ominously in the center. The mirror now contained multiple trapped souls: Gumball, Darwin, Penny, and others, all visible as faint reflections. The park was empty except for the cursed mirror, waiting patiently for its next victims. The cycle would continue forever, trapping anyone who dared to look too closely into the mirror world. Some reflections, once seen, can never be unseen, and some mirrors never let you leave. The Lost Episode, The Amazing World of Gumball, The Empty Mall. This is another lost episode of The Amazing World of Gumball that was discovered in the studio archives. Unlike the previous episode, this one takes place in the Elmore Mall, but something is terribly wrong with this familiar location. It was a Saturday afternoon when Gumball and Darwin decided to visit the Elmore Mall. They wanted to buy a new video game that had just been released. The blue cat and orange fish walked through the automatic doors, expecting to see the usual crowds of shoppers and the familiar sounds of a busy mall. But instead, they found complete silence. The mall was empty, not just quiet, but completely devoid of people. The stores were all open, their lights were on, but there were no customers, no employees, no one at all. Their footsteps echoed eerily in the vast empty space. "Where is everyone?" Darwin asked, his voice trembling slightly. Gumball shrugged, but his usual confidence was shaken. They walked past the fountain in the center of the mall. It was running, but the water was completely black, like ink. The stores they passed were strange. Larry's convenience store was there, but instead of Larry behind the counter, there was just an empty uniform hanging on a coat hanger, swaying slightly as if someone had just taken it off. The cash register kept making ding sounds by itself over and over again. At the food court, all the restaurants were serving food, but the meals were moving on their own. Burgers flipped themselves, fries jumped in and out of containers, and drinks poured themselves into cups that immediately emptied. The smell was wrong too. Instead of food, everything smelled like old paper and dust. They tried to leave, but when they turned back to the entrance, it was gone. Where the automatic doors should have been, there was now just a solid wall with a painted mural of the outside world. It looked real, but when Gumball touched it, it was just flat paint on concrete. The mall's PA system crackled to life. Attention shoppers, the mall will be closing in never. Please continue shopping forever. Thank you for choosing Elmore Mall, where the fun never ends and neither do you. The voice was cheerful but wrong, like someone trying too hard to sound happy. They ran to the escalators, but they were moving in impossible directions. Some went sideways, others went in loops, and one seemed to go straight up into the ceiling and disappear. When they tried to use the stairs, they found that each step led to a different floor, creating an endless maze of levels that shouldn't exist. In the toy store, all the dolls and action figures were arranged in perfect rows, but their heads slowly turned to follow Gumball and Darwin as they passed. The toys' eyes were too bright, too alive. A teddy bear in the window display waved at them with a stitched smile that seemed too wide. The electronics store was playing the same commercial on every screen, but it was a commercial for the mall itself. "Come to Elmore Mall," said a voice that sounded like their mother Nicole, "where your family shops together forever. Forever and ever and ever." The screens showed footage of the Watterson family shopping, but their faces were blurred and wrong. They found a directory map of the mall, but it showed impossible things. There was a department of lost children on the 3rd floor, a store of forgotten dreams in the basement, and a restaurant of last meals near the food court. The "You Are Here" arrow kept moving around the map by itself. In the clothing store, mannequins were dressed in clothes that looked exactly like what Gumball and Darwin were wearing. But as they watched, more mannequins appeared, all dressed like them, creating an army of plastic duplicates with empty, staring eyes. The music playing throughout the mall was a distorted version of the show's theme song, played backwards and slowed down until it sounded like a funeral dirge. Sometimes they could hear children laughing, but when they looked around, there were no children anywhere. They tried calling for help on the mall's courtesy phone, but instead of a dial tone, they heard their own voices having this exact conversation, as if they were trapped in a loop. "Hello? Is anyone there?" they heard themselves say over and over again. In the bookstore, all the books had the same title, The Amazing World of Gumball, the episode that never ends. When they opened one, the pages were blank except for a single sentence repeated over and over. "You can never leave the mall. You can never leave the mall." The security cameras throughout the mall all turned to follow them, their red recording lights blinking in unison like a heartbeat. On the security monitors, they could see themselves from every angle, but in some of the screens, there were additional figures following them, shadowy shapes that weren't there when they looked around. Finally, they reached what should have been the exit, but instead found Richard, their father, standing in front of a store called Dad's Perfect Day. He was smiling, but his smile was too wide, and his eyes were completely black. "Boys," he said in a voice that was the lost episode of The Amazing World of Gumball that never aired. It was a Tuesday morning at Elmore Junior High, but something felt different from the moment Gumball and Darwin walked through the front doors. The hallways were unusually quiet, with only their footsteps echoing against the lockers. Miss Simeon's classroom was empty when they arrived, though her coffee was still steaming on the desk, as if she had just vanished. Darwin noticed at first the way their classmates' reflections in the windows didn't match their movements. Penny's reflection was facing the wrong direction, while Tobias's shadow seemed to be waving when he was standing still. When Gumball tried to point this out, Darwin's reflection wasn't moving its mouth, even though Darwin was clearly speaking. The school bell rang, But instead of the familiar chime, it played a haunting lullaby. Students began filing into classrooms, but their movements were too synchronized. Everyone walked at exactly the same pace, turned their heads at precisely the same angle, and sat down in unison without a word. During lunch, the cafeteria served the same meal to everyone, a gray substance with no smell or taste. Gumball watched in horror as his classmates ate in perfect silence, their spoons moving in identical patterns. When he tried to speak to Carrie, she turned to look at him, but her eyes were completely white, reflecting nothing. The afternoon brought an assembly that wasn't scheduled. Principal Brown stood on the stage, but his voice came from everywhere at once, announcing a special test. The test papers appeared on every desk simultaneously, though no one had distributed them. The questions were written in symbols that shifted when you weren't looking directly at them. As Gumball tried to fill out his test, his pencil was writing answers he hadn't intended. His hand moved on its own, forming words in that strange script. Around him, every student was writing the exact same answers in perfect unison, their pencils scratching in a rhythm that sounded like breathing. When the final bell rang, students began leaving in single file, their faces blank. Gumball and Darwin tried to follow, but found themselves walking in circles through hallways that stretched longer with each step. The exit doors led back into the same corridor, and the windows showed only darkness. The janitor appeared at the end of the hallway, mopping with movements that were too fluid. When he looked up, his face was a perfect mirror, reflecting not Gumball and Darwin, but two empty desks in an empty classroom. He spoke without moving his lips, telling them that school would never end, that they would take the test again tomorrow until they got the right answers. As the lights began to dim, Gumball realized that the test wasn't about knowledge. It was about becoming like everyone else, moving in perfect harmony, thinking the same thoughts. The school was transforming its students into something else entirely, something that looked the same but felt completely hollow inside. The glitch in Elmore. It started on a Tuesday morning when Gumball noticed something strange about his reflection. In the bathroom mirror, his reflection moved a split second too late, like a video with bad lag. He blinked, and for just a moment, his reflection didn't blink back. "Darwin, come look at this," Gumball called to his best friend. But when Darwin approached the mirror, his reflection appeared normal. "I don't see anything weird, dude," Darwin said, his orange fins shrugging. At school, the glitches became more obvious. During math class, Mrs. Simeon wrote equations on the blackboard, but the numbers kept changing when no one was looking directly at them. 2 plus 2 would become 2 plus 3, then 2 plus 4. Students began getting different answers to the same problems, causing confusion and arguments. "This is impossible," Anais muttered, her pink ears twitching with frustration. "Mathematics doesn't just change." But even as she spoke, her textbook's pages flickered, showing different problems than what she had just read. During lunch, Penny approached Gumball with a concerned expression. "Have you noticed anything off today?" she asked. Her shell seemed to shimmer strangely, as if she was slightly out of focus. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not quite here, like I'm watching myself from outside." The glitches spread throughout Elmore Junior High. Lockers would open to reveal different contents each time. The cafeteria served the same meal repeatedly, but students couldn't remember eating it. Clocks showed different times depending on who looked at them. Gumball and Darwin decided to investigate. They snuck into the school's basement, where they discovered something that shouldn't exist. A massive server room filled with humming computers and blinking lights. Cables snaked across the floor like digital veins. "What is this place?" Darwin whispered. On the main screen, they could see a wireframe model of their school, with small dots representing every student and teacher. Each dot had a label: Character Gumball version 2.3, Character Darwin version 1.8, Character Anais version 3.1. A voice echoed from the speakers. "System update in progress. Debugging reality matrix. Some characters may experience temporary glitches during the upgrade process." Gumball's eyes widened in horror. "We're not real. We're just characters in some kind of simulation." The realization hit him like a digital tsunami. Everything they had ever experienced, every emotion, every friendship, it was all code. Darwin's form began to flicker. Gumball, I can feel myself being rewritten. My memories are changing. I remember things that never happened, and I'm forgetting things that did. The school around them started to pixelate and distort. Students in the hallways moved in jerky, unnatural motions. Some froze mid-step, others repeated the same action over and over. Tobias walked through a wall as if it wasn't there. Carmen's speech became a loop. Hey guys, hey guys, hey guys, we have to get out of here, Gumball said. But as they ran toward the exit, the hallways stretched impossibly long. Doors led to the same rooms they had just left. The school had become a digital maze with no escape. In the computer room, error messages began flashing on screens. Memory overflow detected. Character behavior outside parameters. Initiating emergency reset. Gumball felt his own thoughts becoming fuzzy. He couldn't remember why he was running or what he was afraid of. His personality was being overwritten, replaced with default settings. The fear, the curiosity, the love for his family, all of it was being erased and replaced with generic character traits. Darwin, he called out, but his friend was already gone, replaced by a basic fish character with no personality, no memories, just swimming in place with empty eyes. As the reset completed, Gumball found himself back in his bedroom, waking up as if from a dream. Everything seemed normal. He went downstairs for breakfast, greeted his family, and headed to school. But sometimes, just sometimes, he would catch a glimpse of code in the corner of his vision, or hear the faint hum of servers beneath the floorboards. The glitch was gone, but the knowledge remained buried deep in his programming. They were all just characters in someone else's story, and any day, they could be deleted, updated, or reset without warning. The most terrifying part wasn't being trapped in a simulation. It was knowing that tomorrow, he might not even remember that he had ever known the truth. In the final scene, the camera pulls back to reveal a programmer's desktop, with Elmore displayed in a window labeled The Amazing World of Gumball Episode, Render version 4.2. The programmer clicks Save and Exit, and the window closes, leaving only darkness.